Dragon Age Origins is one of my favorite games of all time. For those who haven't played it and maybe are turned off by the graphics or the clunky gameplay, Dragon Age Origins is a tactical action RPG with some of the best story and character writing out there. And since the critical acclaim of Origins, for one weird-ass reason or another, BioWare has simply never been able to recapture the essence of that Dragon Age experience. The studio came closest with its direct sequel, Dragon Age 2, but even judging by the name, you can already tell that Dragon Age 2, which to this day lacks a subtitle, was an unfinished mess. The gameplay was unbalanced, the main character's major choices didn't matter, plotlines would play out regardless of whether you consented to participate in them or not, and the game shuffled between a handful of reused environments over and over, periodically changing the start and end point as if that would trick the player into thinking they were traversing an entirely new area. What's worse is, from a fundamental design standpoint, the game takes place entirely in one city, Kirkwall, a city which the story and characters go out of their way to tell us is a miserable, miserable place.
Ah, Hightown, where the rich go to piss their money away. This really is the best place in Kirkwall.
While it's nice at times to uncover the seedy underbelly of that city to learn the dark secrets of the people within, having just the one setting, even if the game were finished, and I remind you, it wasn't, severely limits the storytelling potential and the awe factor of uncovering cool fantasy locations. You also couldn't talk to your party members like you could in Origins. Instead, Dragon Age 2 had a system more similar to the Dragon Age Awakening DLC released with Origins, where outside of specific story or relationship moments, you couldn't initiate full conversations with party members.
By the Dreadwolf! Why is my house always such a mess when people are here? It's clean sometimes, I swear.
And that sucked. Have you ever tried not wanting to talk to Meryl?
Delish mothers frighten their children with stories about you, you know. Not you, personally, of course. I'm sure they don't have any tales about you. Or not scary ones, at least. Not that you're not notable enough to have a story. I'll just shut up.
That said, Dragon Age 2 is the closest to Origins we would ever get. In November 2014, EA and BioWare released Dragon Age Inquisition, which went on to get critical acclaim. I saw some fuckhead write a post on some forum that Dragon Age Inquisition won Game of the Year. No game that wins Game of the Year can be bad. Well, Barack Obama won a Nobel Peace Prize, you fucking idiot. Dragon Age Inquisition was a significant departure from everything that made Dragon Age, Dragon Age. I've already talked about this at length in a previous video called The Blandish Inquisition, which I recommend everyone go check out. I'm really proud of it. But just to gloss over a few points, combat is tedious and boring. There was a shift to more large world exploration rather than fine-tuned intimate scenarios. Story and quest design is hyper gamified and grindy, and there's just an overall lack of emphasis on characters and decision making to progress the narrative. And now we get Dragon Age Dreadwolf, which the more I learn about, the more I get really, really fucking worried. I am not excited for this game. I can't be after Inquisition, but it would be really awesome if BioWare returned to the series' roots, dare I say, its origins, and delivered an amazing experience. But all the telltale signs are saying that this game is going to go down the same route as BioWare's previous projects. As the best case scenario, we get another Inquisition. Worst case, we get Anthem. And I'm not happy for either of those prospects. So when I see a headline saying that Mark Dara, who previously left BioWare on seemingly less than amicable terms, has come back to finish Dreadwolf, I get a painful case of deja vu. We have been here before. Dragon Age 4 was announced almost 5 years ago, apparently, and still has no release date, which is fine. I hate when video games announce their development and release dates too early. I wish more games would pull a Rockstar or a Capcom and announce games when they're pretty much already done. Though, I also wish game companies were less tight-lipped about the whole process in general so that hype and marketing weren't such absolute shit shows all the time. Although I realize with such an expensive and involved creative process, it to some extent demands this level of nonsense. Although I'm certain things could be done differently and better. All that said, Dragon Age 4 was overhauled after the massive failure of Anthem. In fact, I think it was overhauled twice. In the early stages, it was supposed to be this kind of heist-type game with in-depth dialogue systems taking place in Tevinter. Then it got switched to be this always-online live service model. And now, if it exists, really big if, it's in a new form which presumably resembles neither of those things. There was leaked alpha footage showing a combat system more action RPG based, akin to like God of War 2018, which really pisses me off because the Origins tactics system was one of the best, most fun RPG combat systems I've ever played, and too many games are shifting from that really satisfying party-based combat experience. Like, short tangent, Final Fantasy 16 looks absolutely incredible, and I can't wait to play it, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit depressed at the thought of not having more control over the party like in 7 Remake or previous Final Fantasy games. I feel like the action RPG push is becoming a little like the massive push to open world we saw after the success of Ubisoft titles and Breath of the Wild, and it remains to be seen how well this fares for a lot of games who prided themselves on being slower, more methodical, or turn-based affairs. I really hope this isn't the death of the tactical or turn-based RPG is what I'm saying. Anyway, to put this whole thing into context and to elaborate on my offhand remark 2 paragraphs ago, Dragon Age 2, Inquisition, and Anthem all had incredibly rocky development processes during which the final shapes of the games didn't really begin to take form until the last year or two of each respective development. That means that it's still very likely that Dragon Age 4 does not exist in any meaningful way yet. This process, exposed by Jason Schreier after Anthem's release, was known internally as BioWare Magic, and was described back then by Mark Dara, now consulting for Dragon Age Dreadwolf, as an awful process akin to the shape of a hockey stick.
What is BioWare Magic? Well, in short, BioWare Magic is this. What the hell is this? This is the hockey stick. And what's the hockey stick? Well, the hockey stick is something that happens in a lot of development where you are going along, not making a ton of visible progress. You're slowly getting things done, but if you draw that line out, your game is shipping in like 30 years. And then at some point that is usually impossible to identify before the fact, you hit a pivot point and things start clicking together. The volume of content is enough. There are enough systems, things start clicking together, and the game development essentially pivots, and you start getting things done way faster. And this last little jog up, that's what people at the studio are talking about when they say BioWare Magic, talking about the fact that things come together really late and things get better really late. That's terrible, right? Because you don't know what the angle of this thing is going to be. You don't know if it's going to be shallow. You don't know if it's going to be super steep. And you don't even know when it's going to happen. Is it going to happen right away and you're going to start getting things done really fast? Or is it going to be way out in the future and you're going to be slogging through this slow development process forever? You don't know. And that's the reality, is this in triangle here, this part of where you could be. This is lost understanding. If you were getting things done in a reasonable way, at a faster rate, then you would have the ability to play the game and iterate on the game and see what the hell it is you are making. Now, is this perfectly straight line even possible? It's probably not possible. You're going to have some sort of curve. But if you can at least push the angle of the flat part of that hockey stick up some, or make it curve up or something, you are going to gain understanding that you didn't otherwise have.
This is the process that pumped out Dragon Age 2, described by Jason Schreier, writing for Kotaku at the time. One of the biggest problems was that the chilly reception to Dragon Age 2, a narrow, often repetitive game made in just 14 months, left the developers feeling skittish and insecure. As creative director Mike Laidlaw told me in an interview for the book a few years ago, this insecurity led him and his fellow directors to second-guess a lot of their decisions. "You're following a negative experience," he said. "You're not quite sure where and how to get it back, and on top of that, you're introducing all this new gameplay that leads to an inherent insecurity." By the time Inquisition finally launched in November of 2014, everyone was burnt out. Laidlaw and executive producer Mark Dara told staff they would try to do things better for their next project, acknowledging that they had made mistakes and telling the staff that they didn't want to shoulder that kind of load again. They said they would focus on delivering an explicit, consistent vision and communicating that vision to the team in as efficient a manner as possible. Following 2015's critically acclaimed Trespasser expansion, the Dragon Age team split up. Many of the people who'd worked on Inquisition moved to the troubled Mass Effect Andromeda, while a few dozen developers, including Dara and Laidlaw, started spinning up the next Dragon Age, which was codenamed Joplin. I don't know how common this is with big budget game companies, but despite massive burnout and low morale, these development teams were shifted around constantly to provide support on other projects. And that's really not unique to game design. Every organization does this. If you've ever worked in a school or in an office right before a really big deadline, people are constantly being moved, sometimes completely out of their range of ability, just to plug holes. So when Inquisition was getting ready to ship, a bunch of BioWare staff moved to help on that team. When Anthem was struggling, developers from the Dragon Age 4 team and the DICE team would shift over to help that get on its feet. One former BioWare developer said that they and some of their co-workers would bring up these concerns to directors, only to be ignored. You'd come to management saying, "Look, we're seeing the same problems on Inquisition and Andromeda, where design wasn't figuring things out. It's getting really late in the project and the core of the game isn't defined." Basically saying, "Hey, the same mistakes are happening again. Did you guys see this the last time? Can you stop this?" said the developer. They'd be quite dismissive about it. Mark Dara, the former lead for all things Dragon Age, had also been moved to be the executive producer on Anthem and help kick the team into shape. This is after David Gator, a former writer for the Dragon Age series, moved on to Anthem to try and fail to help the story come together. Ironically, Mark Dara had previously and emphatically clarified via tweet that he was not working on Anthem. But when shit hit the fan, he was the one they called on to help clean things up. Jason Schreier writes, "If Dragon Age Inquisition hadn't been so successful, perhaps BioWare would have changed its production practices. Perhaps studio leadership wouldn't have preached so strongly about that BioWare magic, that last-minute cohesion that they all assumed would happen with enough hard work and enough crunch. But it was ultimately Dragon Age Inquisition's executive producer who steered Anthem out of rocky waters and into port." The good thing about Mark is that he would just wrangle everybody and make decisions, said one former BioWare developer. That was the thing that the team lacked. Nobody was making decisions. It was deciding by panel. They'd almost get to a decision, then somebody would go, "But what about this?" We were stagnant, not moving anywhere. It's emphasized that no one really knew what the game was. Before Mark Dara came along, no one was making decisions. "They never seemed to settle on anything," added that person. "They were always looking for something more, something new," said another. "I think most people on the team felt like we didn't know exactly what the game was or what it was supposed to be because it kept changing so much." And that's really the point I want to stick here. We've been here before, and maybe I'm blowing things out of proportion. After all, Dara is only consulting now, not executive producing. But even so, I think it's fair to note the patterns as they keep emerging. We have basically no information about this game that's supposedly close to completion, and it's coming off the heels not just of Anthem and Andromeda, but more pertinently, of Inquisition and Dragon Age 2.
me at last. I suspect you have questions.
Inquisition pisses me off to no end. It's the Pokemon Legends Arceus of Dragon Age. By any reasonable measure, it should be considered a failure, but the fans liked it, and it got sales and accolades, so that retroactively justifies a shoddy development process, crunch, and criminal mismanagement. As Jason Schreier writes, among those who work or have worked at BioWare, there's a belief that something drastic needs to change. Many at the company now grumble that the success of 2014's Dragon Age Inquisition was one of the worst things that could have happened to them. The third Dragon Age, which won Game of the Year at the 2014 Game Awards, was the result of a brutal production process plagued by indecision and technical challenges. It was mostly built over the course of its final year, which led to lengthy crunch hours and lots of exhaustion. Some of the people in Edmonton were so burnt out, said one former BioWare developer. They were like, we needed Dragon Age Inquisition to fail in order for people to realize that this isn't the right way to make games.
This triangle is just bad process. At the end of the day, what is BioWare Magic? BioWare Magic is shit process. It's putting a name on something that's saying, don't worry, don't freak out, because we know that at a future date, it's all gonna get faster and it's all gonna work out. But the reality is that working out, that's where crunch comes from. And that's where delayed games come from, because you can't predict with a hockey stick. You don't know where the pivot point is. You don't know what the angle is. There's no predictability there at all. So you're making it up by delays and crunch time. BioWare Magic is bullshit.
After the high-profile failures of Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem, it has become clear to current and former BioWare employees that this attitude is no longer working. In recent years, BioWare has done serious damage to its reputation as a premier RPG developer. Maybe the hockey stick approach is no longer viable, or maybe, just maybe, that sort of production practice was never really sustainable in the first place. Fans are sending the wrong message, and look, I get it. I'm not morally above anyone else. I've played Hogwarts Legacy, and we had no idea what the development was like behind the scenes when the game came out. But if you play enough of these games, you can feel the crunch oozing from the seams. You could feel it with Dragon Age 2. You could feel it with Inquisition. You could feel it with Anthem. I never played Andromeda, but you could probably feel it with that game too. And I just want to be able to say that I was here calling out the signs before that Dreadwolf expose comes out. I'm not ringing the alarm bells. I don't know enough to be able to say definitively that Dragon Age Dreadwolf will be awful or plagued with awful mismanagement like its brothers and sisters. But I will say that I do not trust BioWare or EA to have magically regained its footing with misstep after misstep after misstep. All that remains is to wait and see. I want nothing more than to get that Origins experience again, the RPG that got me into those kinds of RPGs. An experience full of meaning and character and morality and grand world building, the likes of which Ubisoft and so many other studios have been trying to emulate, only to pale in comparison. But I really don't have hope in this modern BioWare. I know that those developers on the ground floor, the ones who pulled together Anthem, who pulled together Inquisition and Dragon Age 2 and Andromeda, they're working their asses off and then some. And they really need a union which represents their interests. Congrats to the QA contractors on their union win in 2022, by the way. None of this is their fault. They're talented individuals, sapped for all their worth by the biggest parasites of society, the capital-owning class. But I truly hope, for their sake, that the situation as I've outlined it here is not the case, that there are no more stress casualties, and that at the end of the day, they feel comfortable and safe and confident in the sense that they are building something reasonably worth the effort they have put in, no less and no more.